The house is finally quiet. No doors slamming, no late night returns, no backpacks dropped in the hallway. For years, you said you couldn't wait for this phase. More time, more calm, less chaos. But now that the nest is actually empty, the silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels sharp. Conversations with your adult children are shorter, more superficial, always squeezed between their responsibilities. Calls feel like updates, not connection. When you give advice, they go quiet. When you ask too much, they pull away. Inside your marriage, the dynamic has shifted too. Without the kids as a buffer, every small irritation feels louder. Old patterns resurface. One talks, the other shuts down, or both talk, but nobody really hears. You try harder to fix things by talking more, explaining more, insisting more. But the harder you push, the further everyone seems to drift. The cruel part is that you're not trying to control, you're trying to care. Yet what your family experiences isn't care, it's pressure. And there's one skill that quietly decides whether this new phase becomes distance or depth: the way you listen. Here's the paradox. You spent decades talking in this family, but almost nobody ever really felt heard. The years were full of conversations about grades, curfews, chores, money, college, career choices, relationships. You explained, corrected, warned, argued, defended. You thought that because there were words, there was communication. But much of what happened wasn't connection. It was management. You were responsible for raising these kids, so most exchanges had a goal: teach, protect, correct, influence. That made sense when they were small, but now, in the empty nest years, those same habits quietly destroy intimacy. The more you try to manage, the less they want to talk. The more you insist, the more they retreat, and you interpret their distance as ingratitude or rejection, while they experience your concern as pressure and judgment. The paradox goes deeper. The more intensely you care, the worse it often gets. You call because you're worried. You ask questions because you want to stay close. You offer advice because you don't want them to suffer the way you did. Inside, it feels like love. On their side, it often lands as interrogation, criticism, or control. They start editing what they tell you. They leave out the parts that might trigger your panic, your lecture, your "I told you so." The relationship becomes a performance. They give you safe updates. You respond with safe comments. Everyone stays at the surface. You tell yourself they're busy, that it's normal for adult children to pull away. But underneath, there is a quiet terror. What if the way you're trying to hold on is exactly what's pushing them away? The same pattern shows up inside your marriage. When the kids were home, there was always something practical to discuss: schedules, problems, logistics. Communication meant exchanging information to keep the household running. Now the house is quiet, and there's time to talk. But about what? If one of you tries to open up, "I feel lonely. I'm scared about aging. I don't know who I am," without being a parent. The other often responds with solutions, minimization, or defensiveness. You share a fear. They explain why you shouldn't feel that way. You express a resentment. They bring up their own list. Nobody is actually holding space for the other. You're both speaking. You're not really listening. And every failed attempt at vulnerability becomes another argument, another reason to stay silent next time. What makes this so insidious is that almost nobody thinks the problem is listening. It's easier to blame personalities, generations, technology, or busyness. They're so sensitive. Kids these days don't respect parents. My partner just doesn't talk. But underneath many of these dynamics is something simpler and more uncomfortable. When someone in your family starts to share their inner world, you often get anxious. That anxiety makes you rush in to fix, defend, explain, or redirect. You interrupt. You correct their version of events. You tell them not to feel what they feel. You make it about your intentions instead of their experience. In your mind, you're helping. In their body, it feels like being dismissed. Over time, it becomes safer not to bring you their real thoughts at all. There's another layer. In empty nest years, everyone is going through a transition at the same time, but from different directions. Your adult child is trying to build a separate life, carry new responsibilities, and prove to themselves they can function without you. You're dealing with loss of daily contact, shifting identity, and sometimes fear of irrelevance. Your partner may be facing aging, career plateaus, or their own unresolved resentments. Each person feels fragile in their own way, and when people feel fragile, they become worse listeners. You listen to respond, not to understand. You listen for signs that you still matter, that you're not being blamed, that you haven't failed. You scan their words for threats or confirmations of your worst fears. Real listening requires you to set your own story aside for a moment. But in this phase, your story feels louder than ever. The cruel twist is this: the more you talk to defend your role, your value, your past choices, the less room there is for your family to actually show you who they are now. When your adult child says, "I needed more space growing up," and you immediately list everything you sacrificed, the conversation dies. When your partner says, "I don't feel seen," and you respond with, "Do you know how hard I've worked?" They learn that sharing their inner world only leads to a debate. Slowly, people stop bringing you the truth. You end up surrounded by polite, careful versions of your family, and you tell yourself this is just what aging is, everyone becoming more distant. But much of that distance is not inevitable. It's defended. It's what people build when they don't feel listened to. Here's the final paradox. You're desperate to be heard in this phase of life, to have your fears, regrets, and needs recognized. But the only reliable way to be heard is to become a better listener yourself. You want your adult children to ask how you are, but you rarely create space for their full answers without correcting or advising. You want your partner to understand what this transition is doing to you, but you cut them off when they describe what it's doing to them. You're waiting for them to change first. They're waiting for you to change first. Everyone is waiting, defending, explaining. Almost no one is deeply listening. And yet, the smallest shifts in how you listen can quietly rewire the whole system if you're willing to give up the illusion that talking more or talking louder is what will save these relationships. Changing family dynamics in the empty nest years doesn't start with saying more. It starts with saying less and hearing more. The core shift is moving from listening as a way to respond, fix, or defend, to listening as a way to witness the inner world of the other person. That sounds abstract, but it's painfully concrete in practice. When your adult child says, "Work has been overwhelming," your old reflex might be to jump in. "You think that's hard? When I was your age," or "Have you tried talking to your boss?" or "That's why I told you that field was unstable." Listening as witnessing means you don't rush there. You stay where they are instead of dragging the conversation back to your experience or your solutions. You might say, "Sounds like a lot. What's been the hardest part?" Or simply, "Tell me more." The message underneath is, your experience matters here more than my agenda. To do this, you have to make a brutal psychological admission. For years, most of your listening was about control. Control of outcomes, control of risk, control of your own anxiety. You listened just long enough to identify the problem, then took over. You finished their sentences. You argued with their feelings. You corrected their memories. You steered the conversation toward the decision you thought they should make. You weren't trying to be a tyrant. You were trying to be a good parent in a world that felt dangerous and unforgiving. But now, the job description has changed. Your child is no longer a project. They're an adult, and adults don't open up to people who treat them like a task to be managed. So the first real tool is internal, not external. You decide that in this phase of life, understanding is more important than influence. You want to know what it feels like to be them, even if you can't change it. Practically, this requires slowing down the micro moments of conversation. Your adult son calls and mentions a conflict with his partner. You feel your chest tighten, your mind racing to judgments and fixes. In the old pattern, you'd jump in with, "Well, she always seemed," or "You can't let people treat you like that." In the new pattern, you notice that urge, but you don't obey it. You take a breath and stay curious. How did that leave you feeling? What are you thinking of doing? You're not passively nodding through everything. You're inviting him to hear himself more clearly. Ironically, the more space you give, the more likely he is to eventually ask, "What do you think?" And when he asks, your words land differently. They're not intrusions. They're welcomed. The same discipline applies with your partner. Maybe you've fallen into a pattern where one of you complains and the other counters. "I feel like we don't talk anymore." That's not true. "We just talked yesterday about," or "I'm worried about our finances." "Oh, so now it's my fault?" Real listening with a partner in the empty nest means you stop treating every vulnerable sentence as an accusation or a problem to eliminate. You treat it as data, as a window into their internal reality. If your partner says, "I feel invisible now that the kids are gone," you resist the urge to argue with the feeling or quickly reassure it away. You say, "Invisible how?" or "When do you feel it the most?" You may disagree with their perception. You may feel unfairly portrayed. But you give their experience airtime before you bring in your own. That pause is where connection grows. Another crucial shift is learning to let discomfort sit in the room without immediately numbing it with advice, stories, or jokes. A lot of talking is anesthesia. When your adult daughter says, "I'm not sure I'm happy in my marriage," it terrifies you. The implications flood your mind. Divorce, financial strain, grandchildren, your own history. Your body wants to get away from that fear. So you lecture, warn, reframe, or minimize. "Every marriage is hard. You're just stressed. Don't make any rash decisions." What you're really doing is trying to get rid of your own anxiety, not hers. Listening here means you let the sentence exist without immediately wrapping it in bubble wrap. That's a big thing to carry. How long have you been feeling this way? You're not endorsing anything. You're allowing reality to be spoken out loud in your presence without punishing it. And paradoxically, that makes your voice more trustworthy later, not less. Listening in empty nest years also means updating your mental model of who your children are. You still see the teenager who slammed doors, the 8-year-old who was shy, the 5-year-old who needed you for everything. But they have lived 15, 20, 30 years of life you did not witness in detail. They have colleagues, friendships, nights, crises, and choices you only know in headlines. When they speak, they are not just representing your child. They are bringing an entire private universe of experience. If you keep answering the child you remember instead of the adult in front of you, your responses will always miss. You'll be giving safety advice to someone who's dealing with existential questions. You'll be talking about study habits when they're drowning in debt and burnout. Deep listening requires you to admit, I might not know you as well as I think I do anymore. Help me update the picture. One surprisingly powerful listening tool is to separate curiosity from cross-examination. Adult children can feel the difference instantly. Curiosity sounds like, what's that been like for you? How did you end up there? What surprised you about it? Cross-examination sounds like, why didn't you? So why on earth would you, and you thought that was a good idea? The words might be similar. The tone and intent are not. Curiosity wants to understand. Cross-examination wants to judge and control. In empty nest years, if your questions consistently feel like an attempt to gather evidence against their decisions, your children will ration what they tell you. To shift this, you ask questions you genuinely don't know the answer to. From a posture of respect, walk me through how you decided that. And then, this is crucial. You resist the urge to immediately evaluate the decision out loud. Inside the marriage, listening changes when you stop scorekeeping and start mirroring. Scorekeeping listening is when you hear everything your partner says as a potential line in an argument you might need to win later. You said last week you were fine with this, but remember when it prepares rebuttals instead of presents. Mirroring listening does something subtler and braver. It reflects back the essence of what you heard before defending or explaining. Your partner says, I feel like you're more focused on the kids, even now, than on us. The reflex is to deny, attack, counter, that's not true. Well, what about you? Instead, you mirror. So from your side, it feels like you're lower on my list than the kids, even though they're gone. Did I get that right? You may still explain yourself later, but you first prove that their inner reality landed. That proof is what reduces defensiveness and opens space for your side to be heard as well. Listening also has a physical component. Empty nest years often mean more time in shared spaces. Same house, fewer people. But that doesn't automatically translate to connection. If your body is always half turned toward your phone, TV, or laptop, the message is your background noise. Practicing listening means you occasionally give someone your full orientation. You put the phone down, you turn your chair, you look at their face, not in a fake, exaggerated way, but in small, consistent moments. Humans read attention with animal precision. Your adult child on a video call will know immediately whether you're secretly checking email or fully with them. Your partner will know if your eyes glaze when the topic isn't interesting to you. You cannot fake listening with posture and eyes for long. Your body tells on you. The discipline of embodying attention, even for 5 minutes at a time, tells your family, this matters. You matter. Another necessary shift is accepting that you don't always get the last word. In the parenting phase, you usually did. You set the rules, close the arguments, made the call. In the empty nest phase, if you try to keep doing that, you collapse the possibility of adult-to-adult connection. Listening now sometimes means you let their perspective stand, even if you disagree, even if it stings. Your son says, "I felt like you were more critical than supportive when I was growing up." Your reflex is to rush in with context, defense, evidence. "We did our best. You have no idea what we were juggling. You're being ungrateful." Instead, you try. It hurts to hear that, but I want to understand. Can you tell me what felt most critical? You can share your story later, but if you argue them out of their experience, you win the battle and lose the relationship. Listening in this phase also involves knowing when not to enter the ring at all. Not every comment requires your opinion. Not every life choice needs your approval stamped on it. Sometimes your adult child is not actually asking, "What do you think?" They're asking, "Can you hold this with me for a minute?" Before you speak, you can ask yourself, what role am I about to step into? Judge, advisor, fixer, or witness? If you consistently step into witness first, you will often discover that they needed far less from you than you thought. A simple, "That sounds rough. I'm proud of how you're handling that," or "I'm here if you want to talk more," can do more relational work than a 10-minute monologue of advice. To sustain this, you will have to confront your own unmet hunger to be heard. Empty nest years often awaken long-buried resentments, regrets, and lonely parts of you that never had a voice when the family was in full chaos. If you try to use every conversation with your children or partner to finally get that hearing, you will overload the relationship. Part of the inner work of listening is finding other places to be deeply heard. Therapy, close friends, support groups, journaling, so that you don't unconsciously demand that your family carry the weight of all your unspoken decades. When you've had space elsewhere to express your fears about aging, your anger about past sacrifices, your grief over lost years, you come back to family conversations less desperate, more spacious. And spaciousness is what makes listening possible. Finally, the shift is philosophical. You stop treating listening as a communication technique and start treating it as an ethic. An ethic says, "This is who I choose to be, regardless of how others behave." You listen better not only when they are calm and appreciative, but also when they're clumsy, emotional, or unfair. You don't reward perfect expression and punish messy honesty. You develop a quiet, stubborn commitment. If you trust me enough to bring me your real self, I will try to make this a place where that real self can exist without being immediately fixed, shamed, or argued into submission. That doesn't mean you never set boundaries or share your truth. It means you put connection before correction. In the empty nest years, that decision to prioritize understanding over control often marks the difference between a family that slowly drifts into polite distance and one that discovers a deeper, more equal, more honest way of being together than ever existed under the same roof. When you start listening differently, the first change is almost invisible from the outside, but seismic inside the relationships. People stop bracing around you. Your adult children no longer rehearse what to say before they call. They don't scan every word for how you might react. They begin to trust that they can bring you half-formed thoughts, inconvenient truths, and imperfect decisions without being immediately corrected or managed. That safety doesn't turn them into reckless fools. It makes them more honest. You become one of the few places in their life where they can lay things down instead of constantly performing competence. Inside your marriage, listening shifts the emotional climate from low-grade defensiveness to quiet collaboration. When one of you speaks and the other doesn't instantly counter, something softens. The nervous system stops preparing for trial and starts relaxing into dialogue. Arguments don't disappear, but they change shape. Fewer courtroom battles about who's right, more joint investigations into what's really going on with us. You stop recycling the same fights because you're finally hearing what sits underneath them: fear, loneliness, shame, longing. Those are things two people can work with. Two egos defending their own version of the past cannot. Listening also changes how you see yourself. You're no longer just the parent who gives advice or the partner who has to win the point. You become someone who can hold complexity without needing to control it. That is a different kind of authority, quieter but deeper. You realize you don't lose power by listening. You gain influence. People start seeking you out, not because they have to, but because something in them rests in your presence. And in a phase of life where so much feels like it's slipping away, youth, roles, routines, that kind of presence is a form of wealth. Over time, the empty nest doesn't feel so empty. The house may still be quiet, but the connections running through it, calls, messages, visits, shared moments with your partner, are denser, more real. You're no longer trying to recreate the old family you had under one roof. You're participating in the family that exists now, adults choosing freely to keep each other close. And that shift from proximity by obligation to closeness by choice is one of the most meaningful transformations these years can offer. Listening is not a soft skill you add on top of your real personality. It is the difference between spending the empty nest years defending your past role in the family or actually building a new one. You can spend this phase arguing that you meant well, that your children are too sensitive, that your partner is unfair. You can keep explaining, justifying, clarifying, but none of that creates connection. It just proves that being understood matters more to you than understanding them. And as long as that's true, everyone will keep a little distance. They'll choose safer audiences for their real struggles. They'll give you filtered versions of their lives. You'll stay important in name, but peripheral in reality. Or you can do something far more radical and difficult. You can decide that from now on, the people you love will not have to fight for space inside your conversations. You will make room. You will let their version of events exist next to yours without immediately trying to erase it. You will let their feelings land without rushing to manage them. You will let silence stretch for a few seconds longer than is comfortable instead of filling it with your own fear. That decision won't be dramatic from the outside. It will look like small pauses, different questions, shorter speeches. But over months and years, it rewrites the emotional code of the family. You cannot go back and reparent your kids. You cannot replay your marriage with the wisdom you have now. What you can do is change the quality of the next conversation. And then the next. One call where you listen more than you advise. One evening where you mirror instead of defend. One moment where you say, "Tell me more," instead of, "That's not what happened." These are tiny moves, but they are the kind of tiny moves that, repeated, turn a house full of ghosts and old roles into a living network of adults who actually want to be in each other's lives. The nest may be empty. The table may have fewer chairs filled. But if you learn to listen now, the years ahead can hold a kind of honesty and closeness you never had when the rooms were crowded.